Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be conducting a comprehensive analysis based on a very specific set of biographical records and music history archives.
We are. And the subject is a band that really defined an entire era.
The Police. Now, when you think of a massive stadium-filling rock band, you might picture, 5 or 6 people on stage, maybe the classic four-piece.
Right. The Beatles, the Stones.
Exactly. But the Police were what's known as a power trio, just 3 individuals. And yet, they managed to create this incredible sound, blending reggae, punk, and jazz in a way that just completely dominated the airwaves in the late 70s and early 80s.
It's a very distinct and I would say technically complex combination of genres. They emerged from London in 1977, which is a key detail. The time and place were just so defined by this collision of 2 musical worlds.
What were they?
Well, on one side, you had the dying embers of the progressive rock scene. Bands known for extreme technical skill, long, complicated instrumentals, a very high barrier to entry for the musician.
And on the other side?
The absolute explosion of the punk movement, which was, in essence, a complete rebellion against all that complexity. Punk was all about raw energy, speed, and frankly, a deliberate lack of musical polish. The Police found themselves right at the intersection of those 2 opposing forces.
And that intersection, that's really the central paradox we need to unpack here. You have these 3 musicians who were, according to all the records, incredibly skilled. I mean, they were jazz and prog rock guys, technically.
Oh, absolutely.
And they effectively pretended to be a punk band just to get a foot in the door. From there, they become arguably the biggest band in the world, and then they just walk away. Right at their absolute peak. It baffled everyone.
It did. So our objective here is to really analyze their full biography right up to the present day, January 2026. We'll be looking at their formation, their incredibly rapid ascent, those famous internal tensions that seem to fuel their creativity.
And then the breakup, and of course that massive reunion tour.
Precisely. And all the information we're using today is drawn from detailed biographical records, chart statistics, and historical music archives.
So let's start the story. We need to go to Newcastle upon Tyne. The date is September 25th, 1976.
Okay.
Stewart Copeland, an American drummer, is on tour with a British prog rock band called Curved Air. They're playing in Newcastle. And a music journalist, a guy named Phil Sutcliffe, introduces him to a local musician.
And this musician is a singer and a bassist, playing in a jazz rock fusion band.
A band called Last Exit. And his name is Gordon Sumner, though pretty much everyone knew him by his nickname Sting.
And it's relevant to note here that this wasn't just a chance encounter in a pub.
No, not at all.
The introduction was facilitated by an industry contact, the journalist. Copeland actually got Sting's phone number from Phil Sutcliffe's partner. That specific connection was the catalyst for everything that followed.
It really was. Because Sting, he had ambitions. He wanted to make it big. So he decides to move to London. That happens on December 14th, 1976.
And what's the first thing he does?
The very day he arrives in London, he calls Stewart Copeland. He seeks him out for a jam session. And Sting has described this first meeting in the records. He said it was a 15-minute lightning set.
Just 15 minutes?
Yeah. He even admitted to squealing and screaming during the session because the energy was just that intense. He was totally inspired, even though he was brand new to the city, a complete unknown.
And this leads directly to Copeland's strategy. He had just left Curved Air, and he was watching the rise of punk with a very keen eye.
He saw an opportunity.
He saw a huge opportunity. His plan was to form a band that could essentially assimilate into that burgeoning London punk scene. Sting, on the other hand, was apparently less enthusiastic about the punk aesthetic itself.
You a jazz guy.
He was a jazz guy, but he was smart enough to recognize the commercial possibilities it presented, so they formed the Police. It's a trio. But it's important to clarify something here.
What's that?
The guitarist at this initial stage, it wasn't Andy Summers.
No. It was a Corsican guitarist named Henry Padovani. He was the 3rd member for this, let's call it the first phase. They played their first ever show on March 1st, 1977. It was at a place called the Alexandria Club in Newport, Wales.
And the archives note that this debut show lasted for a grand total of 10 minutes.
10 minutes. That is incredibly short, even for a punk band.
It's basically 3 songs.
Right. So for the next few months, they're just grinding it out, playing London pubs and punk clubs. They were often the support act for artists like Cherry Vanilla and Wayne County and the Electric Chairs.
And during this time, they do manage to release their debut single. It's a song called Fallout, which came out on May 1st, 1977.
It was on illegal records, recorded at Pathway Studios in Islington. The budget for the entire recording was £150.
A shoestring budget.
Yeah.
And this remains the only official Police recording that actually features Henry Padovani on guitar. It is notable, though, that Mick Jagger reviewed the single in Sounds magazine.
Wow, I didn't know that.
He did, which gave the band a little bit of early visibility in the press, which was, invaluable at that stage.
But the lineup that we all know, the one that would become famous, was just about to fall into place. In May of '77, a musician named Mike Howlett, who used to be in the band Gong, he invites Sting to join this side project he's putting together. It was called Strontium 90.
Okay, so a different project entirely.
Right. Howlett needed a drummer. His first choice wasn't available, so Sting says, hey, I've got a guy, and he brings Stewart Copeland along.
And the fourth member of this one-off project
Was guitarist named Andy Summers.
And Andy Summers is a completely different profile compared to Padovani.
Night and day.
He's a decade older than Sting and Copeland, for a start. And he's a seasoned veteran musician. He'd already played with Eric Burdon and the Animals, Soft Machine, Kevin Ayers. I mean, he was a known quantity.
A pro. And when Summers heard Sting and Copeland play together, just as a rhythm section, he immediately saw the potential. He's quoted in the archives as saying he felt the three of them, together, would be an incredibly strong unit. He believed he was the guitarist they needed to actually get somewhere.
And this is where the friction starts, because at the same time, Sting was getting more and more frustrated with Henry Padovani's technical limitations on the guitar.
It was holding them back.
It was restricting what they could do musically. So after a Strontium 90 gig, Sting approaches Summers and asks him to join the Police.
And Summers agrees, but there's a catch.
There's a condition. He said he would only join if the band remained a trio. He would replace Padovani, not join as a fourth member.
Which is a tough spot to be in. Initially, Sting and Copeland resisted, and they felt a sense of loyalty to Padovani. They actually tried to make it work as a four-piece band for a very brief period.
The records show they performed live just twice as a quartet, in July and August of 1977.
But it didn't work. After a really disastrous, aborted recording session with the producer John Cale, Summers basically delivered an ultimatum. It's him or Padovani.
So Padovani was dismissed, and the classic, definitive power trio lineup was solidified in August 1977.
So there we have it. Sting, Stewart Copeland, and Andy Summers. But even with this upgraded, much more musically proficient lineup, they still had to navigate that punk scene. And the analysis suggests they were viewed with a lot of suspicion by the punk purists.
The suspicion was almost entirely due to their musical skill.
Right, they were too good.
Exactly. The punk movement was largely defined by a kind of deliberate amateurism, this raw, untutored expression. And here are these three guys who are clearly virtuosic musicians. The music critic, Christopher Gable, put it well. He said the band merely used the trappings of 1970s British punk.
The trappings, what does he mean by that?
He means they had the energy, they played fast, they had the look. But musically, they were incorporating reggae, jazz, progressive rock. Things that were anathema to the punk ethos. Other punk bands criticized them for not having street cred.
They weren't authentic enough in their eyes.
Precisely. Though Gable does concede that they did adopt the, and I'm quoting here, nervous, energetic disillusionment that really characterized the whole era.
Well, speaking of those trappings, we have to talk about their visual identity. That bleached blonde hair became their absolute trademark, but the archives show this was a complete accident.
It wasn't a deliberate artistic choice.
Not at all. In February 1978, the band was, to put it mildly, broke. They were facing serious financial problems. And they get this offer to appear in a television commercial.
For Wrigley's Spearmint Chewing Gum. And the commercial was set to be directed by Tony Scott, who would later go on to direct films like Top Gun.
So a pretty high-profile gig. But there was a condition in the contract.
The condition was that all three members had to dye their hair blonde. The casting directors wanted them to look like a generic punk band.
And at that time, in the public imagination, bleached blonde hair was sort of the visual shorthand for that entire subculture.
I was part of the uniform.
So they do it. They dye their hair. And the punchline is, the commercial was never even aired.
Never saw the light of day. Andy Summers has mentioned in interviews that there was apparently a scene where the band had to carry a ridiculous 6-foot-long packet of Wrigley's gum across a room.
So the ad gets shelved. but they're stuck with a hairstyle. And it becomes this iconic, identifiable visual brand for them.
Visual unity is a huge factor in marketing a band. And while this was happening, they were also developing their musical identity in other, less conventional ways.
You're talking about the German composer.
Yes. During this time, they were also moonlighting, working with a German experimental composer named Eberhard Schöner. This is actually a crucial detail because the archives suggest it was during these performances that Sting really began to develop that high-pitched, soaring vocal style that became such a signature element of the Police's sound.
So they're refining their sound, they've accidentally found their look, but they're still financially unstable. They go to record their first album, Outlandos del Amor, with no manager and no record deal.
And they were forced to record it during off-peak hours at a place called Surrey Sound Studios. The facility itself was a converted space located above a dairy, not exactly Abbey Road.
Not at all. The money for these sessions came from Miles Copeland, Stewart's older brother.
And Miles was initially very skeptical. He was particularly wary of Andy Summers' inclusion in the band.
Why was that?
He was afraid that having this older, experienced muso guitarist would completely undermine their punk credibility, which he saw as their main selling point. He very reluctantly put up £1,500 to finance the album.
And according to the story, Miles was not impressed with the material they were recording. He just wasn't hearing a hit. Until
he heard one particular song at the very end of a session. Roxanne. He was immediately struck by its quality, its uniqueness. He knew it was a hit. And on the strength of that one single track, he went out and secured a record deal for the band with A&M Records.
But Roxanne wasn't an immediate hit. It was released as a single in early 1978.
And it completely failed to chart. Now, there's this persistent story, this myth almost, that the song was banned by the BBC.
Right, because of the subject matter, prostitution.
Exactly. The reality is a little more nuanced. It wasn't officially banned, but it did fail to make the BBC's official playlist, which the band attributed to its theme. But A&M Records, being very savvy marketers, they seized on this.
And they ran with it.
Yeah. They created these posters that boldly claimed the single was banned by the BBC. It wasn't technically true, but that marketing angle was incredibly effective. It generated a lot of buzz and interest around the song.
So while they're building this momentum in the UK, they also decide to tackle America. They undertake this grueling tour of North America in 1979. And this was not a glamorous stadium tour.
Far from it. This was the definition of grassroots. They were driving themselves across the entire country in a Ford Econoline van.
Wow.
Playing these legendary but small clubs. Places like CBGB in New York and the Rathskeller in Boston.
And that effort, that American hustle, was so important for their long-term career. It was that tour that led to Roxanne finally getting its first plays on U.S. radio and slowly but surely climbing the charts.
It eventually peaked at number 32 in the U.S. And that success in America spurred A&M to re-release the single back in the UK.
And the second time around, it hit number 12.
Which brings us to October 1979. They released their second album, Regatta de Blanc. And this is really the moment that marks the significant turning point for their success, especially in the United Kingdom.
This is when things really take off.
This is the explosion. Regatta de Blanc went straight to the top of the UK albums chart. It was the first of 4 consecutive #1 studio albums for the band in the UK.
And it spawned 2 massive hit singles, Message in a Bottle and Walking on the Moon.
Both of which went to #1 in the UK, so they're dominating the charts. But the success wasn't just commercial. Their musicianship was also starting to get serious critical recognition.
And the title track is a perfect example of that. Regatta de Blanc is an instrumental piece.
It is. And it won the Grammy Award for Best Rock Instrumental Performance.
Which is a huge deal.
It's a massive validation. It proves their capability beyond just being a standard pop act that writes catchy singles. It showed the industry that these guys could really play.
So following this huge success, they embark on a world tour in March of 1980. And this tour was notable for its ambition, for its sheer geographical scope.
Yes, they made a very conscious decision to perform in countries that were rarely, if ever, visited by major Western rock bands at the time.
Like where?
Mexico, India, Taiwan, Egypt. Places that were just completely off the beaten path for a rock tour in 1980.
And this whole global approach was documented in a film, wasn't it? The Police Around the World. It just shows they were thinking bigger. They were intent on establishing themselves as a truly international act, not just a British or American one.
And by touring those emerging markets so early in their career, they established a global fan base that many of their contemporaries simply didn't have. It was a very forward-thinking strategy.
But that success came with a lot of pressure. The third album, Zenyatta Mondatta, was released in October 1980. And the context around this recording is, well, it's defined by extreme time constraints.
Yet the pressure on the band at this point was immense. The record company was pushing them very hard for a new product and a quick return to touring to capitalize on their momentum.
So they recorded the album in just 3 weeks?
3 weeks in the Netherlands, primarily for tax reasons. The story goes that they literally finished the album at 4 o'clock in the morning on the very same day they were scheduled to start their next world tour.
That's insane.
It is. But despite that rushed process, the album was another huge commercial success. It topped the UK charts again, and it reached number 5 in the US.
And it had some of their most iconic songs. Don't Stand So Close to Me and dee-da-da-da-da-da-da, Don't Stand So Close to Me was actually the best-selling single of the entire year, 1980, in the UK.
And it also secured them another Grammy, this time for Best Rock Vocal Performance for a duo or group. On top of that, the instrumental track Behind My Camel, which was written by Andy Summers, won the Grammy for Best Rock Instrumental Performance.
So 2 Grammys for that album.
Yes. But it's interesting, in later years, all 3 band members have expressed a degree of regret about how rushed that album was. They felt it could have been better if they'd had more time.
Now, after this period, there's a shift in the band's personal logistics. In the early 80s, Sting and Andy Summers both become tax exiles. They relocate to Ireland.
While Stewart Copeland remained in England. And this physical separation, you could argue, started to mirror the creative separation that was beginning to develop within the group.
And that brings us to their 4th album, Ghost of the Machine, released in 1981. This album represents a pretty significant shift for the band, both technologically and stylistically.
It does. It was produced by Hugh Padgham, who was known for his work with artists like Peter Gabriel. It was recorded mostly in Montserrat, and the sound is just much denser, it's thicker. They're incorporating layered saxophones, complex vocal textures, a lot of new digital influences.
You can even see that shift on the album cover.
Absolutely. The cover art features these digital pictographs of their heads. They look like segmented LED displays. It was a very deliberate nod to the dawning computer age.
And the hits kept coming. Every Little Thing She Does is Magic and Invisible Sun.
Invisible Sun is a particularly notable track for its subject matter. It directly addresses the Troubles in Northern Ireland. The music video was actually banned by the BBC.
This time it actually was banned.
This time it really was. But Every Little Thing She Does Is Magic was a massive upbeat hit. It went to number 1 in the UK and number 3 in the US.
But around this time, you start to see the members branching out more and more into solo projects.
Yes, and Sting in particular was establishing himself as a major star, completely independent of the band. He had already acted in the film Quadrophenia back in '79.
Right, as the ace face.
Exactly. And in 1982, he starred in a film called Brimstone and Treacle. He even had a solo hit with the song Spread a Little Happiness from that movie's soundtrack.
And the others.
Stewart Copeland was also very active outside the band. He composed the entire musical score for Francis Ford Coppola's film Rumblefish, an incredible piece of work. And Andy Summers recorded an instrumental album with Robert Fripp from King Crimson.
So these outside projects, they really indicated that the band itself was no longer the sole creative outlet for any of them. It was becoming just one part of their careers.
And as Sting's individual fame increased, his relationship with Copeland in particular really deteriorated. The archives are full of mentions of conflicting egos and the immense pressure of worldwide publicity.
And yet, despite all that internal tension, they were about to have their greatest commercial success.
They were. By 1983, Rolling Stone magazine had labeled them, and this is a quote, possibly the biggest band in the world. They were at the very forefront of what was being called the second British invasion of the U.S. music charts.
And in 1983, they released Synchronicity.
This album was just a commercial behemoth. It went to number 1 in the UK, it went to number 1 in the U.S. In America, it stayed at number 1 for 17 weeks.
17 weeks, that's over 4 months.
It sold over 8 million copies in the U.S. alone. It was a phenomenon.
But the process of recording it was, by all accounts, torturous.
Notoriously difficult. The interpersonal tension was so high that the band members recorded their individual parts in separate rooms, often at different times, just to avoid having to be in the same space together.
Stewart Copeland has a great quote about it. He described the musical experience of working with Sting at that time as being like a Prada suit made out of barbed wire.
It's a perfect description. All this creative friction, this tension, was somehow part of the magic that produced the music. And the centerpiece of that album was, of course, Every Breath You Take.
A song that won the Grammy for Song of the Year. It beat Michael Jackson's Billie Jean.
Think about that. Beating Billie Jean for Song of the Year in 1984. And in May 2019, the music rights organization BMI officially recognized Every Breath You Take as the most performed song in their entire vast catalog. It's a staggering piece of intellectual property.
So they take this massive album out on tour. And that tour includes a performance at Shea Stadium in New York, August 18th, 1983.
They played to 70,000 people. And during the show, Sting walked up to the microphone and said, "We'd like to thank the Beatles for lending us their stadium."
It's an iconic moment. But for Sting, it was more than that. It was an epiphany.
That concert served as a profound turning point for him personally. He later stated that he felt performing at Shea Stadium was like climbing Mount Everest. There was nowhere higher to go. And according to the documentary, The Last Play at Shea, he decided that very night that he was going to leave the band.
So after the tour finally wrapped up in Australia in March of 1984, the band entered what was officially called a hiatus.
Yeah.
Sting went off and released his first proper solo album, The Dream of the Blue Turtles.
They did reconvene briefly in June of 1986. They played a few dates on the Amnesty International A Conspiracy of Hope tour.
And that tour is now seen as this hugely symbolic moment, a real passing of the torch.
It is. Their last performance was on June 15th, 1986 at Giant Stadium in New Jersey. And during the finale, they famously handed their instruments over to the members of U2. Bono from U2 later remarked that it felt like passing a torch to the next biggest band in the world.
But there was one last attempt to make a new record. They tried to record a sixth album in July of 1986, but then an accident happened.
A very bizarre accident. The night before the studio sessions were supposed to begin, Stewart Copeland was riding a horse.
As you do.
And he fell off, breaking his collarbone. He was physically unable to play the drums. And this freak accident effectively ended any chance of them jamming together, of maybe rediscovering their old chemistry.
So what did they do?
They ended up using a drum machine. They tinkered around and managed to produce a new, re-recorded version of an old song, which was released as Don't Stand So Close to Me 86. But as Andy Summers later reflected, the whole thing was just an empty exercise. Sting had absolutely no intention of writing any new material for the band.
And that was it. The Police, for all intents and purposes, disbanded. For the next 20 years, they all went their separate ways.
Sting, of course, had a massive and hugely successful solo career. Copeland became a respected film composer and played in other bands like Animal Logic and Oysterhead. And Summers really focused on his photography, writing, and various jazz collaborations.
There were a few brief encounters over the years.
Very brief. They played a couple songs at Sting's wedding in 1992. Copeland noted that after just 3 minutes of playing together, the old dynamic, that thing, just immediately came back.
And they played together for their induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2003.
But a full-scale reunion seemed impossible until 2007.
To mark the band's 30th anniversary, they officially reunited for a massive world tour. They kicked the whole thing off by opening the 49th Grammy Awards in February 2007. Sting walked out and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we are the Police, and we're back."
And from a purely business perspective, this reunion was a monumental success.
The numbers are incredible.
The tour sold 3.7 million tickets. It grossed $358 million. It was the highest-grossing tour of 2007, and at that time, it was the third highest-grossing tour of all time.
But the internal dynamics, they were still complicated. The tension was still there.
Oh, yes. After their second show on the tour in Vancouver, Stewart Copeland went on his own website and wrote what he called a scathing review of their performance. He called the show lame.
And the press, of course, jumped all over that.
He did. He later apologized, and he attributed the comments to his own hyper-self-criticism. But it was a very public glimpse that showed the old friction hadn't just disappeared.
The tour finally came to an end on August 7, 2008 at Madison Square Garden in New York. And Sting made it very clear from the stage. He said, "There will be no new album." That's it.
And they finished that final show with tributes to two of their biggest influences, Cream and Jimi Hendrix. It's also worth noting they used the tour for philanthropy. They donated $1 million to New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg's initiative to plant 1 million trees in the city.
So when we look back and assess their legacy, the statistics are just staggering. Over 75 million records sold, 6 Grammy Awards.
And 4 of their 5 studio albums are on Rolling Stone's list of the 500 greatest albums of all time. They really define that transition from the raw energy of punk to the massive scale of stadium rock. They were an absolutely crucial part of that second British invasion.
And what about their personal relationships now?
Well, Andy Summers clarified in a 2015 interview that he feels the press really exaggerated the level of animosity, the hate between them. He stated that they were actually very supportive of one another these days.
But Sting's reflection in 2024 was pretty definitive. He described the 2007 reunion as, quote, cashing that asset in. He acknowledged its success, but said that doing it again would be a bridge too far.
He closed the book.
He closed the book. It's just an amazing narrative of a band that was active for such a relatively short period of time. I mean, we're talking about 6 years of active recording in their prime. And yet they left behind this catalog of music that still completely dominates the radio decades later.
They really do remain a primary case study in how creative tension, while it can be completely destructive to personal relationships, can sometimes be the essential, non-negotiable fuel required for creating masterpieces.
Thanks for listening.